Fox News Alert, President Biden just reacting to a damning special counsel report on his handling of classified documents, a report that called him an elderly man with a poor memory.
The special counsel released their findings today about their look into my handling of classified documents. I was pleased to see they reached the conclusion I believed and knew all along they would, that there are no charges should be brought in this case. As many of you know, this was an exhaustive investigation, going back literally more than 40 years. 40 years when I became a United States Senator when I was a kid. I was a kid, 29 years old. Bottom line is the special counsel in my case decided against moving forward with any charges, and this matter is now closed.
The special counsel releasing his long-awaited classified documents report. Robert Hur is his name, and he is not recommending criminal charges. But he laid out how the president willfully retained and disclosed highly classified materials when he was a private citizen, including sensitive national security matters and documents about military and foreign policy in Afghanistan. And as the White House feared, the report is full of embarrassing details, including these dramatic photos of tattered boxes in Joe Biden's Delaware garage, right next to the Corvette. The sensitive files were stored, quote, near a collapsed dog crate, a dog bed, a Zappos box, an empty bucket, a broken lamp, wrapped with duct tape, potting soil, and synthetic firewood. But remember when Biden told you that everything was secure?
Classified material next to your Corvette? What were you thinking?
Let me, I'm going to get a chance to speak on all this, God willing, soon. But as I said earlier this week, people, and by the way, my Corvette's in a locked garage, okay? So it's not like you're sitting out in the street.
So
but at any rate,
was in a locked garage?
Yes, as well as my Corvette. But as I said earlier this week, people know I take classified documents and classified material seriously. They discovered a small number of documents of classified markings in storage areas and file cabinets in my home.
The special counsel is also painting a devastating picture about the president's mental acuity with this quote. We have also considered that at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. It would be difficult to convince a jury that they should convict him, by then a former president well into his 80s, of a serious felony that requires a mental state of willfulness. And that wasn't the only instance of the special counsel bringing up Biden's significant limitations when it comes to memory. The president also could not recall the years that he was vice president or when his son, Beau, died. President Trump has issued a statement, team here. I'll read it for you. He said they should immediately drop the case against me. I am covered by the Presidential Records Act. He wasn't. He had many, many times more documents, totally unguarded. Mine were always surrounded by Secret Service and in locked rooms. And Biden also made some more comments about a distinction between him and Trump. Listen here.
But I was especially pleased to see the special counsel make clear the stark differences between this case and Donald Trump. As the special counsel wrote, and I quote, several material distinctions between Mr. Trump's case and Mr. Biden's are clear. And by the way, this is a Republican counsel. Most notably, after given multiple chances, special counsel acknowledged I cooperated completely. I did not throw up any roadblocks. I sought no delays.
Okay, so we can talk about the merits of the case, but I think that the most devastating thing that I've seen in this campaign so far is from the special counsel on mental acuity. And Greg, I'll turn it over to you, but want to put up this poll for everyone. Just to remind you, the NBC poll from this week asked a question: does Trump or Biden have the necessary mental and physical health to be president? And only 23% of those polled said Biden had that mental capacity. So, over to you.
Remember how hard the media pushed the 25th Amendment?
Yes.
Now here it is. Mm-hmm. What do you do when it's your guy? Clearly there's evidence of severe memory loss, confusion, mental impairment. What are you waiting for the poor guy to wander down Pennsylvania Avenue in nothing but a shower cap? We thought Harvard had diminished faculties. They aren't just talking, by the way, about your kindly neighbor who forgets where he is and he's wandering on your front lawn in an open robe. We're talking about the leader of the free world, right? You know, they're describing him as an elderly man with a poor memory that doesn't possess a mental state of willfulness. I mean, this is not Gramps with onset dementia. This is the president of the United States. He has the keys to the nuclear football. I can only hope that he doesn't know or remember where it is. But this is like, I mean, it's, to quote Morrissey, the joke isn't funny anymore. It's now really real. They told us something we already knew, and it's something that the media can't spin, right? They basically said he's mentally unfit to stand trial. Yep. That is a naked assessment. I mean, we've seen him refer to dead people as if they're alive. He can't do simple interviews in the Super Bowl. He's declining faster than his poll numbers. And I think at this point, something's going to happen.
I'm beginning to think so too. And I had not been thinking that way mostly, except for when Jesse asked me to comment if Michelle Obama is going to be stepping in. I do wonder if, Jesse, since they had an idea, the White House had an idea that this was coming for a while, that it was one of the main reasons they decided to decline the opportunity to do that Super Bowl interview, because he would have had to have been asked about it.
That would have been the first question at the Super Bowl interview. And then he comes out today and says, case is closed. And then he says, I became president to bring red states and green states together. Yeah. And he says he wants to bring back Roe versus Ward. And this is 2 days after he says, I saw dead people. Twice. He's saying he's meeting with people that have been dead for 30 years. By the way, look at the garage. Does this look like the garage of a president of the United States? Or does this look like your grandfather's pack rat garage? That is not the way you organize your life as a president. There's a broken lamp with duct tape next to classified documents. They actually had to move the files to a different box because the thing, you couldn't even pick it up. It would fall apart. There's like dusty golf clubs, shoe boxes, and hunters in and out of there with God knows who. Come on. So they said this guy willfully retained classified documents that put our national security at risk because it was in an unsecure location, but you couldn't ever get a conviction at trial because he's an elderly man with memory issues. And he didn't really know what he was doing because he's got diminished faculties. So this is the same thing they do with Hillary. Hillary definitely broke the law, and they laid out about a dozen times how she did it. But then they list about half the report about why we're not going to bring charges. They did the same thing with him. It's another beautiful off-ramp. But remember what they did to Mar-a-Lago. They had pictures of beautifully organized stacked boxes in a ballroom. And the media says, how dare Donald Trump mishandle classified documents like that? And CNN, to this point, before we came on the air, they haven't even put up the garage photos. Yeah. They haven't even put it out there. Did you know that the ghostwriter who he shared classified documents with destroyed the tapes when he found out there was a special counsel investigation? So the minute he hears they're being under investigation for mishandling classified documents, the guy deletes all of the tapes of Joe Biden. And then they're not going to charge him, of course. But they have Joe Biden on tape, and I would love to hear these tapes because Joe Biden's on tape saying, yeah, these are classified. And he's sharing classified information with his ghostwriter. It's what David Petraeus got popped for. It's the exact same thing. And then they're saying this guy's painfully slow, significant limitations, struggles to remember events, straining at times to read and relate his own notes. This was 7 years ago. We're now 7 years after the fact. And we're talking not only 25th Amendment, we're talking about you might have to bow out because the crescendo now is going to grow so large of not just the people in the press corps, but other Democrats are going to see this and they're going to read this and they're going to say, how can you do this to this guy? Because right now this was a devastating body blow to the reelection campaign. No matter how they want to spin it, this was bad.
Can you imagine being the press secretary thinking about that briefing tomorrow?
I don't think there will be one.
I might call in sick, Judge. I want to talk about the White House's response to Robert Hur saying that the comments about mental acuity are superfluous and unnecessary, and that they said that they weren't, and that they're not true. and they wanted Robert Hur to take them out.
Oh, wait a
and he
minute.
didn't.
Wait a minute. Okay. So you can't have it both ways. The comments are not true, but the conclusion they came to not indict Joe Biden is accurate and to the point. Let me tell you something. This report is worse than an indictment. This report demands the 25th Amendment, and here's my Constitution. This man needs to be thrown out of office. And there's another point. The fact that they talked about the fact that he's an old man with a poor memory 7 years ago, that he's sharing classified documents at a time when he's not even president. Donald Trump was president. This guy was in possession of documents as a senator, as a vice president. He had no right to have that information. Sharing it with his ghostwriter, sharing it, I'm sure, with the editor. The editor would not have published a book without making sure that everything in that book didn't have backup. I've written 8 books. I know that. And then they say, well, he also showed a letter from Kim Jong-un to Bob Woodward in the Oval Office. Everything about this tells and shows the American people how there are 2 separate systems of justice. And this is where my prosecutor comes through. If you get to the point where you say, no jury will convict this guy because he is non-compos mentis, because he does not have the mental capacity to form the intent, that means you've already gotten to the point where you believe he should be indicted, but you're not indicting him because you don't believe the jury will find him competent to stand trial. This is the worst thing that can happen to Joe Biden. And let me say one more thing about that. When they made the decision to not indict, they still could have indicted him the way they indicted Donald Trump for espionage. The espionage charges that Donald Trump is under by crazy Jack Smith don't involve intent or willfulness. They involve gross negligence. So if you want to tell me Joe Biden can't formulate intent, he cannot formulate a willfulness, then for sure you can get him for gross negligence. Explain to me, Mr. Hur, why there is a difference there. And this indictment against Donald Trump, for a number of reasons, and I don't want to hog the time, should be dismissed based upon the joke that this whole thing is.
Harold, want to hear everything you have to say, but I want to set it up this way. So the special counsel is saying that Biden is too old and incompetent to be held responsible for mishandling classified information and state secret. And Biden is saying, I am not too old and I am not incompetent and I want 4 more years as the leader of the free world. I mean, how is that supposed to go over?
So this is a tough day for the White House and for President Biden. I think 2 things, and I think the judge said some of it, and basically everyone has said things that I agree with. I don't disagree with a whole lot. The thing for me is what Mr. Hur said, that he willfully retained the documents, which on the Trump matter has been the predicate for why charges were brought. So if you believe he willfully retained the documents, but your argument, the president's argument, President Biden's argument is that I cooperated fully with him and then President Trump did not. If indeed that is the case, and it looks like that could be the case, at least what we're reading in the public narrative, then maybe President Trump should have been charged with only obstruction of justice.
Exactly.
And should have been charged with the handling of the documents. This case here, and the way it has been handled, will certainly give more credence to that argument. But we can't ignore the politics. The politics are infused with the legal part of it, and it's certainly infused with the second part, which is Mr. Hur's conclusion that if he took this before a jury, that Mr. Biden might seem sympathetic because he's an older fella with diminished memory. The White House is pushing back on that. It is going to be difficult to push back on that. Judge, I agree with your statement there at the end. Reconciling the 2, I'm too old and my memory is too slight for me to be prosecuted, but I should get 4 more years, which is what Dana said. This is it's a complicated piece for the president. But I think if a legal standpoint, I think the question becomes for President Trump, we're talking about presidents here, former President Trump, why was he charged if he willfully retained the documents and President Biden was not? And if the reason is because President Trump, I get the reason, if he didn't cooperate and he told people not to cooperate, that would seem to me to be an obstruction charge. But I just play a lawyer on the
So
five.
people
We'll
might
see
remember
what happens
this
here.
from 60 Minutes. This is when Biden talked about Trump being irresponsible.
How that could possibly happen, how anyone could be that irresponsible. And I thought, what data was in there that may compromise sources and methods? By that, I mean names of people who helped, or et cetera. And it's just totally irresponsible.
Greg, maybe he didn't remember that he had it too.
Yeah, well, it's part of that pattern. It's like they always blame the Republicans or anybody for what they're actually doing. But I hear Biden he's fine. He just spoke to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she told him he can't be tried. So that's good news. That's good news. I also kind of I find this a bit ageist as somebody who is young. That means if I commit a crime, I can't say that I have age-related mental cognitive difficulties. Don't you find that wrong? It's unfair that he gets that defense and I don't.
Maybe in like 5 more years.
I believe you. You could offer that.
Yeah. The other thing, too, is this could be related. His decline could be related to Trump derangement syndrome. There might be an actual biological underpinning that when your brain is focused on an obsessive thought for a period of years, then the other parts of your brain atrophies. You're seeing this a lot with people with TDS. They're failing in their jobs and their relationships because they become overcome with Trump.
What do you think the Democrats are actually thinking now behind closed doors? I can imagine. What do you think Gavin Newsom's thinking right now? Or even Kamala Harris?
Well, I don't want to say what Gavin Newsom's thinking right now because it's dirty. But if I were a Democrat, I'd probably know that this was already happening. It's been whispered about. Everybody knows. This is this thing here, what Judge says is so devastating. This is what they've been trying to hide for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And so Robert Hur spends 2 days with the president. Let's just say 5 to 6 hours total. That's more time than any reporter in 3 years has ever spent with the president. It's more time than we've ever really seen the president. Could you imagine Brett Baer, or let's just say Greg Gutfeld, sitting down with Joe Biden for 5 hours and asking him questions about policy and his performance? Well, Hur did it, and the conclusion was the man has diminished faculties. This is the biggest insight you're going to get about the president from anybody in a non-partisan way. And forget about the fact that he's a Republican. He gave the guy 6 off-ramps to not get indicted, but he's arguing about the classified. He goes, I get to keep these things because they're mine. These are mine. Every other president's got to take stuff home. It's the same argument Donald Trump said, except he's not president. He's on tape arguing, no, this is classified, but I'm going to keep it. Mm-hmm. You can't. This guy comes across as a small, sloppy, and mentally unfit man. And I bet a lot of the people around the world are looking at this report saying, oh, my God.
Right. I wondered about that, too.
Yeah, it's time to move.
Everybody's seeing this, right? So I think that's also why the White House was like, that they're telling her, don't include this because it's superfluous.
Yeah,
but
it's
because
not a
our
conspiracy
adversaries,
anymore.
our enemies, the troops see it. Everybody's seeing it.
Well, the truth is that it's not as though they actually needed this. Everybody's been seeing it for the last few years. But that is confirmation of what we all have been saying and what foreign leaders suspected. And whenever Karine Jean-Pierre or the president get a tough question, they say, as Biden said, everybody knows I take classified documents seriously, or she'll say, everybody knows America's back. They never answer any questions. The president is incapable. 7 years ago, he didn't know when he was vice president, when his term started, when it ended. 6 months ago, we didn't know when his son died. And we are giving this man the ability to be the commander-in-chief of the greatest nation on earth when he is inept. And let me just say one thing, Jesse. At least Donald Trump had Secret Service. In terms of those documents that he had as president. He also had them in locked rooms as president. Joe Biden took them when he knew full well as a senator he wasn't supposed to take them out of his skiff. He wasn't supposed to take notes. And then he says, I didn't know.
Harold, can I ask you, I mean, let's be honest. Aren't the Democrats going to have some secret cabal meeting to say, what are we going to do? We cannot have him at the top of the ticket.
I don't know what the party will do. I do know. Let me say 2 things. First, I agree with what I firmly believe what I said earlier, that the willfully retaining of the documents is a question about both of these cases. One is being treated one way, one being treated another way. It's going to behoove Mr. Smith and perhaps someone at the Justice Department or both to remind the American people again what are the differences between these cases and why was one charged and why was not. Two, we are living at a time we have the two leading candidates for president. Both parties believe that they're too old to be president. If a majority of them do, we're like new people. We now have, to the judge's point, to the point that's been made around the table, we now have an independent verification for someone who chose not to bring legal charges against the president, citing strongly, I've not read all of the document, but citing strongly is one of the reasons that the president's memory and mental faculties would be a favor for him in trial, and he would appeal to the jury, and he didn't want to indict him indict him is the wrong thing, but didn't want to bring charges or recommend charges for that reason. So this is something, again, the Justice Department and the special prosecutor on the other side, Mr. Smith, I think just because the country is so embroiled and engaged with this is going to have to explain, again, the differences between these two cases.
You wanted the last word,
I think
Jesse?
it's the worst 2 weeks since the Afghanistan situation in terms of his
100%.
presidency.
Yes.
You've had a week of immigration, and that's the worst thing he's known for.
Yep.
And then you're now going to get into a week-long discussion of the Democrats saying the president is not mentally deficient. Okay, and the polling, he already bottomed out at 33%, and he's down 6 to Trump. And now you have quotes. Here's a quote. When did I stop being vice president?
Yeah.
Or another quote. Am I still vice president in 2009? Those are direct quotes from the president.
This man is the president.
That's hard.
And you just imagine if this was a report about Donald Trump.
I think it was. They just made it up.
Right. the 25th Amendment stuff. All right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.